Hi everyone, this is Ali John Chaudhary, psychotherapist, and we are here on Brothers, Sisters, Strangers video podcast with Fern Schumer Chapman. And today we're going to be talking about a very interesting subject. In fact, it's a subject I'm quite surprised we haven't really discussed just yet. And it's called jealousy and sibling estrangement. So I find this highly interesting because there was a recent statistic that came up that said that 51% of respondents actually had sibling rivalry issues that carried into adulthood. So this is something that is very prevalent and that happens very often with people in our community in terms of sibling estrangement. So I think that there's room for us to discuss this. So thank you so much for being here, Fern.
Great to be with you, Ali John. Yeah, these are old scripts, aren't they? Where we feel a lot of rivalry and jealousy of our siblings, and we overlook our own uniqueness. And actually, siblings tend to compete over a number of crucial issues. One is looks, intellect, and achievement. And of course, a lot of these feelings of jealousy are fueled by parental favoritism. 2/3 or 3/4 of mothers actually have a favorite child, and that's according to a study by Carl Pillemer. And the children are keenly aware of it. So you can see how this script starts at a very young age.
I absolutely agree with you. I think that this is something that, I remember feeling myself when I was a child with my mom too, and I didn't quite understand it, but sometimes that's part of it, isn't it, though? It's the idea of the feeling we're left with when we observe favoritism or perceived favoritism as well.
Well, we want to feel special and we want to differentiate ourselves. It's very important so that we get the attention we need to be different from our siblings.
That's a good segue into it, isn't it, though? I think that talking about what creates jealousy with them, especially with siblings, is especially important. And I think you named just one there, actually. I think that's really good because, well, we actually named two, but it's fine. We'll get into it then. Differentiation, I think, is really one of them. And I think that that's an important one to highlight because we all want to be different than our siblings, like you said. I think that that's an important thing, right? We want to be our own people. We want to be our own persons. And what happens is, it can sometimes fall into an unhealthy category where we go into a rivalry that can become more toxic. And this can carry on, of course, into our adult life, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that we have to be careful with that, especially.
Yeah, you don't want to be an adult and still competing over looks or achievement. It's so important to individuate and understand how you are unique so that you don't continue to engage in that kind of competition.
Exactly. I think that that's really, really important. And I think that if we become more conscious of it, then, we can see our differences as strengths in that way. And, oftentimes people will in adult life build themselves up in one particular area that can sometimes be different than their sibling. And that's okay. That's perfectly fine that you be the person you are and that you individuate yourself according to who you are. And that is most important. So that's differentiation. And I think that's an important theme. Another one we named also, I think, is favoritism. Favoritism, of course, is something that is very important for us to be careful with, because if we have perceptions of unfairness, in some cases, for example, if a privilege is given to one child and that the other child didn't get it, for example, that can create resentment that can breed into adulthood with regards to perceptions that one child is the favorite with regards to parents and such, and that's something to watch out for as well.
I've been on a number of radio shows and television interviews about my book, Brothers, Sisters, Strangers, and I'm often asked, what can parents do so that their children don't become estranged as adults? And I always give the same answer, which is, do not practice favoritism.
Mm-hmm. That is a big one. And that is very important as well with regards to that, because there can be also emotional preferences, even though it might not come out necessarily as being a privilege or an action of some sort that's done. It could be the idea that there's a perception of emotional preference. So I agree with you. I think that parents need to watch out for that and need to highlight and applaud the fact that their children can be different from one another and that that's okay. So I think favoritism is an important one, of course, and to be careful about that, especially when we go into adulthood. Now, the other one I think is interesting is also temperament. I think that in terms of different temperaments, I mean, this can sometimes fuel difficult sibling relationships in adulthood, because what happens with that is that it can mean that people become more rigid because they have a difficult personality and such, you know, and there's people that are disagreeable in that way. And when we're faced with disagreeable people, it can sometimes spark conflict, especially. So they have a risk in basically making other people feel not good enough, you know, or never being good enough. And that's what we want to be careful with regards to that, because that can, of course, make us feel less than, and when we interact with them and such.
Well, and to that point, oftentimes when you see that kind of rigidity, and I'm not diagnosing anyone here, but there are some sort of narcissistic tendencies. And when you have that, it makes the relationship so much harder.
It does, very much. I agree with you. I think that narcissism can certainly play into it, especially when people get in the power game of dominating other people and such. So that's the hard thing, I think, with that, especially because they'll typically look for validation from others. And if others don't give them that, then they get into blame game and they start to basically finger point others, their siblings and such, you know. So I think that that's a good segue into the next one, which is basically low self-esteem, because oftentimes narcissists or difficult siblings as well will be usually coming from a position of a lack of self-worth, which stems from insecurity, right? And what happens is that they can be very hard on themselves because they can't even live up to their own standard. And that's the thing that makes it really hard, is if they can't live up to their own standard, then they're certainly going to be finger pointing others who can't basically live up to that impossible standard as well. So there's a mirroring effect that happens in cases like that. And the reality of it is that really no one's perfect. And I think that that's important to remember, especially when it comes to that trait.
Right. So how can anyone deal with these kinds of jealous adult sibling relationships?
Well, that's the question. And I think that kind of brings us into our next part here, which is basically, you know, what do we do with that? So I think that what's important here especially is recognizing that you're free to choose what you say and not say, especially in certain contexts, right? If you know that there's going to be some things that are going to be said perhaps in a snarky way or a condescending way, you have a choice to bite your tongue or not in cases like that. So I think that that's really important to be conscious of that. And I think that even highlighting what you agree on is another way of dealing with it, right?
Mhm.
So highlighting people's accomplishments, your siblings' accomplishments first, and then going into your own accomplishments, is kind of a way to kind of bring the defenses down in some cases, because they're not going to disagree that you highlight them, right?
Yeah, I think an awareness of how your sibling may behave and stepping back and anticipating it might help as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's a good point too, Fern, in terms of rehearsing the past, recognizing where the minefields are, especially based on what you know, and just to be careful not to go into those subjects because you know it's not going to end up well. So choosing less contentious subjects is a good way of preparing for perhaps for family functions. And I would add to that also just choosing the amount of time you spend with certain family members and such,
Yeah.
you know? So
Yeah, disengage or don't engage in their competition.
yeah, exactly. And if there's more people around you, then that's good, because you know there's less of a likelihood of having an outburst or an acting out, because of the fact that there's maybe more family or extended family if there is a family function and such. So choosing those moments more carefully, I think, especially when there's other people around, can make that you can butterfly towards someone else, if you will. You know, if the conversation gets tedious or very demeaning.
I mean, I think it's important to say here too that siblings are probably the greatest setup for competition and rivalry. And just by the very nature of sisters being of the same sex, and they're going to compare themselves to each other. And then when the parents start to compare them to each other, it adds another complicated layer and aggravates the situation. So, you know, you have to recognize that siblings by nature are competitive, but you don't have to be competitive.
Exactly. That's the thing. There can be a sibling rivalry to an extent, but it doesn't mean you have to play it out in such a way that you're dominating someone else, right? So in that way, it kind of comes back to what we had said initially, which was to make room for people's personalities in one of our earlier videos. I think that's especially important. And other ways you can protect yourself also is to go with the protector archetype as well. You know, what would my protector do in this situation? You know, or working with slogans. Like one of the slogans I have in my private practice as people leave is, "You got this," you know? So I like that. I think that's an important one as well.
I think too that this is a moment to reflect on your own sense of self. And if you are struggling with low self-esteem, you are going to feel a lot more competitive and a lot more jealous of your sibling. And so maybe it's important to look at yourself and work on your own low self-esteem, which we've addressed in other episodes, to begin a process of feeling better about yourself and about your sibling relationship.
I agree. I think that those are good closing words for today, Fern. So I know we're almost out of time, so let's talk about resources. I think it's important that our viewers know that we do have a Sibling Estrangement Support Group on Zoom that's held twice monthly in North America. Of course, people can join in from all parts of the world, but there is one that is starting up in the UK as well. So if you look on the Facebook page, Sibling Estrangement Sharing, Coping, Connecting, that you can join, you'll find out more information about that, or people can get in touch with me directly by private messaging me and such. And basically, the Facebook page is a good, thriving community of people of like mind that can actually strengthen themselves, empower themselves with regards to their sibling estrangement. And it's a non-judgmental place that is safe, and it's a community that I host, of course, and of course, people can share, ask questions, get advice. It is a great page for that. And of course, there is the blog siblingestrangement.com that I have, the website there. And there's informative articles on sibling estrangement that I invite people to look into. And of course, you are doing wonderful articles on psychology today, Fern. You're bringing that out in the mainstream, which is great. Your articles are getting hefty numbers, which is great. People are listening to that. So that's are looking into that as well. So that's good. And of course, there's your website for to get in touch with you, to find out more about you, and discover different things that of course we talk about and such. And basically, one more thing I'd like to say, of course, is, dear viewers, please do like or subscribe to our page. It does, of course, help us to get the word out. If you feel the need to share our videos, please do. It helps people to understand more about sibling estrangement, a subject that is not talked about often. And we certainly want for the word to get out, and we want for people to feel empowered and have resources on this. So this is really what it's all about.
And I don't want you to forget to mention my book, Brothers, Sisters, Strangers, Sibling Estrangement and the Road to Reconciliation. It is a memoir, but it's also other voices of people who have been estranged, and the social science, which remarkably there is social science behind this very disturbing phenomenon.
You're absolutely right. The book is an important read. It's one of the rare books out there on sibling estrangement. And you give a lot of science behind it. You give a lot of perceptions that will resound with our viewers. And of course, there's, of course, your story of your own reconciliation with your brother, which I think has been quite interesting as well. So it gives a roadmap in terms of what that would ideally look like, So for some of us that, would ask, well, how is that possible? So you give out your perceptions, and especially your feelings about how that's going. And it's not always rosy and peachy, but it is a possibility. So I do recommend that book wholeheartedly. So please do go out there and look for that. So Fern, we're just about out of time. So I just wanted to thank you so much for being here. It's wonderful to have you here, of course, and to be able to discuss all of this. And I do look forward to our next videos that will continue to empower our viewers as well.
I do too. Thanks again.
All right, you take care and we'll talk soon, okay?
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.